Today we had some great questions about hair loss products, supplements. I had a great question obviously right now about how do I think about sort of selling my business and making sure that I'm using my time productively. There was a great question earlier about how do I handle a girl that I really like on a first date and not getting overly attached and sort of pushing her away, which is also a great topic of conversation. We talked about all different teas, green teas, saffron teas, and all the benefits of tea drinking. And so, it was a very fun, very varied conversation that spanned health, relationships, and professional career development, which all three of those I care about very deeply. Welcome everyone to Maximus Call-In Radio Show number 19, April 15th, 2021. And it's actually a great day for California because if you are over the age of 16, you are now eligible to get a vaccine. And so it's a really momentous occasion that everyone can now protect their health. Highly recommend everyone go out and get vaccinated to protect themselves against COVID. It's also just a good news for our society in that I think things are going to steadily get back to normal. The governor of California, Gavin Newsom, has said that things are going to reopen June 15th. So hopefully the world will be back to normal in about 2 months, at least here in California. So if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand on Clubhouse.
I've been experimenting. Okay, so this is a bit of a trip, so forgive the weirdness, but I've been experimenting with green tea extract transdermally.
Okay, this is like ECGC?
Yeah, exactly.
Why are you doing it transdermally?
So mainly because I was taking the extract orally and my stomach was hurting from it. Mm-hmm. So I just thought I'd get creative, and it's actually working really well, like surprisingly well.
That's good to hear. What does it do for you?
So a few things. One, makes me much calmer. Mm-hmm. Two, helps with my appetite. I don't feel like I want to eat as much when I'm on it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess mainly those two, but it's been really great. Obviously I wouldn't recommend it to someone that can take the extract, but yeah, I guess I'm curious your thoughts. Do you have any thoughts on green tea extract? I guess orally.
Yeah, I mean, there is some research on green tea extract and ECGC being the active component or constituent of it in terms of appetite suppressant properties. I believe it has some antioxidant properties as well. I haven't heard about sort of the side effect of people having sort of an upset stomach, but that just goes to show how idiosyncratic supplements are. Things that are fine for one person are not always fine for the next. So, I mean, if it's obviously a useful lesson for you. I have not heard about it used transdermally. I'm not sure there's any research on that. So you're definitely on the cutting edge there. I don't know the molecular mass of ECGC, though. You can Google it and just make sure it follows Dalton's law in terms of being able to absorb transdermally. The other thing too is the extract that you have colored, does it stain your skin?
Yeah.
So yeah, maybe not recommended for the masses unless you're willing to endure that. But if you're getting benefits and it's not causing any other problems, then sounds like it's potentially useful.
Yeah, it's been a week. So far I like it. I think green tea in general is underrated. I guess it's more popular in other cultures, but I don't really hear about people talk about it that much here. Totally.
I actually totally agree with you in that tea is for some reason underappreciated in American culture. I think we're such a coffee culture. Maybe that's just the boon of sort of Starbucks and the other big chains. Interestingly, I think they've tried to promote tea and almost have a whether it's Teavana or a Starbucks equivalent for tea. But Americans I think are so obsessed with sort of fatty and sweet beverages that it hasn't caught on. The reason obviously coffee is so delicious is they add sugar or cream or some alternative version of that just changes the whole mouthfeel and makes it very addictive. Tea, obviously, you can add milk to tea, obviously, if you have it a little bit more like British style or Indian style, but it's not as commonly done. And then, ideally you don't sweeten the heck out of it. So funnily, when you see American sort of tea stores, like David's Tea is a good example, they often literally have chopped up fruit in it to flavor it and sweeten it. which in my opinion ruins tea, because you should appreciate tea for the natural subtle flavors that it has, just like chocolate or wine or any other, healthy but high quality substance. But yeah, and unfortunately hasn't caught on. I actually like tea better than coffee if you're going to consume caffeine. The reason for that is because it naturally contains some of the compounds that you talked about, like ECGC, which have the antioxidant and appetite suppressant properties. But the other major benefit is it has L-theanine, which is an amino acid that counteracts the stimulatory effect of caffeine. And so a lot of people are just less jittery on tea, not just because it has less caffeine, which it does slightly, but it has a lot more L-theanine. And the less roasted your tea in particular, the greater the amount of L-theanine. This is actually a misconception that a lot of people have about tea. They think that, for instance, black tea versus green tea versus white tea has less caffeine. It's actually not true. It actually has pretty similar amounts of caffeine. The main difference is the less roasted it is, it ruins less of the L-theanine. And so black tea has the least amount of L-theanine, green tea has a moderate amount, and white tea, which is essentially just sun-dried tea, has the most amount of L-theanine. And so it's really the smoothest kind of experience. And most people have not even had white tea. I actually highly recommend it. It's very mild. It doesn't, the color is very light. You don't get that dark color that you do in a black tea, or even the green color that you get with a green tea. It's almost translucent. So there's sort of a silver needle white tea is usually the highest grade. That's Chinese tea. It's called Bai Mu Dan. It is a little bit pricey, but it's high quality. It's a very good bang for your buck, and I highly recommend it. The other teas that I really like are high quality green teas. So like a matcha or a sencha are great. Matcha is very unique as a tea because it's powderized and you consume the tea itself. Most other teas, you obviously steep the bag and you throw it out. So the nice thing about that is you're kind of consuming the whole food and you're getting as much out of the tea as possible. You want to make sure you find a high quality matcha, because there's a lot of like cheaper grades out there from China. But Japanese matcha in particular tends to be great. There's a brand, Ito On, that's excellent. They make bottled versions of it. But they also, the best bang for your buck, in my opinion, is Ito On sells tea bags in which they're a mix of matcha and sencha. So they put a little bit of matcha powder in the bottom of the packet. You just pour it into the cup. And then there's a sencha tea bag that you can dip. And so you kind of get the best of both worlds. The sencha is more economical, so you get the green tea. The matcha is kind of expensive, but it's good stuff. And so you get a little bit of that as well. Costco literally sells boxes of this imported from Japan. I think you get like 200 packets for something like $20. It's actually the best deal in tea, in my opinion. So highly, highly recommend it. And I actually recommend to a lot of my clients who don't want to wean completely off caffeine. They find it helpful, but they want to consume a little less coffee because it often does mess with their sleep. A high quality green tea that you limit to the morning time so that it's not bleeding into your evenings is a great choice.
So on the note of tea, I feel like another really underrated one in the West is ginger tea. And it's also great for like if I'm feeling like I have a cold or something. It kind of like totally gets rid of the symptoms. I've just been blown away by ginger tea.
Yeah, ginger is great. Most people are familiar with its anti-emetic effects in terms of it reduces nausea. Obviously, it's actually been used as far back as the 13th century by Chinese sailors. They found that it helps seasickness. So yeah, if you're ever out in a boat and you're feeling nauseous, you don't need to take Dramamine, which is unless you're really, really seasick, then it can help. But if you want something milder and natural, ginger, you can obviously there's ginger candies. You can chew on ginger if you don't mind the taste, and obviously ginger tea is a great choice. There's even peer-reviewed research studies that show it can help with morning sickness for women who are obviously pregnant and getting pretty nauseous as a result of the hormonal fluctuations. Ginger is really great. So I think it's just a great kind of calmer and soother of the stomach and the GI system. If you're kind of feeling a little nauseous, you might get like some mild food poisoning, or you just kind of feel off from something that you ate. Ginger, particularly ginger in combination with turmeric. Turmeric has to be consumed with a fat in order to be most bioavailable, but that combination is really potent because the ginger helps with the nausea and the turmeric is anti-inflammatory. And so it really packs an awesome 1-2 punch. The other tea, by the way, that I highly recommend, and nobody else is going to say this, so I'm the person who's popularizing around the world, is saffron tea. It's very rarely consumed in that form. Most people consume saffron obviously on food. So if you ever had, for instance, Persian rice, they kind of flavor the rice and it adds a nice aroma and scent that makes it yellow. But you can actually cold brew, because I've experimented with this, saffron tea. I think the mistake that people make is they brew it like a normal tea. You obviously use hot water, but it kind of ruins the active chemical compound. So a trick that I learned is you can actually buy powdered saffron. And if you go on Amazon, there's even companies that sell it in little pre-packed vials. They're about 100 milligrams or 125 milligrams, which is a nice kind of serving size or dose. And you just put it in about 32 ounces of water or so and leave it overnight for about 24 hours. And it takes on this beautiful golden color. And it's almost like the Persian equivalent of matcha. So instead of consuming green tea, you're consuming saffron, which is the pistils of the flower. What's really interesting is there was a study that was actually done in Iran a couple of years back that compared saffron tea to methylphenidate, or what's commonly known as Ritalin, which is a stimulant, obviously, for ADHD. And it actually produced comparable effects, which is pretty amazing because Ritalin is a very powerful pharmaceutical drug. Not a joke. You can definitely feel it. Saffron tea is not as stimulating. You're not going to get that like buzz that you do with like a caffeine or a Ritalin or an Adderall, but it does seem to help focus. And so obviously consult with your doctor, not medical advice, etc. But it is a relatively safe herb that's consumed all over the world. So I think it's a pretty reasonable recommendation to just take it sort of casually. So try that out as well. It can be incredibly beneficial. So the person asking on YouTube is we are actually piloting. We're doing an alpha pilot right now. We have a testosterone optimization protocol. It's pretty amazing. If you are in California or Florida, we are taking on participants. So if you are, you can feel free to message me on your social media platform of choice, and we'll get you enrolled. If you're not in California or Florida, but you're still interested, you can still DM us. Just let us know what state you're in. We'll put you on the wait list. And when we roll out to, Texas, Illinois, New York, etc., we'll obviously let you know.
Good. How are you? Thank you so much for your advice last week. And I did talk with the coaching people, and I said no. And I did listen to a bunch of episodes from your previous podcast and everything. So I have a lot of questions for you, but I'm not going to ask them all tonight. But specifically one thing I want to ask you tonight, depending on your time. So you talked about hair loss products in one podcast, and then you talked about finasteride and minoxidil, and then at the end you said, well, there's stuff that works better, and then you would talk about it later. So what is out there, or what are your recommendations for just general, genetic hair loss for?
Yeah, it's a great question. We're working on a product right now. We haven't released it yet, so we're not talking too much about it yet. But I would say just kind of keep your eyes peeled. Hair loss is like the trickiest thing in the world. Quite honestly, I don't think anyone knows the answer to it, because androgenic alopecia is mostly genetic. And even though there are a couple FDA approved compounds, which is minoxidil and finasteride, as we talked about, they don't tend to work very well. And quite frankly, whenever someone comes up with something that does, it's going to be the next $1 trillion product, in my opinion. Not billion, but $1 trillion product, because people will pay a lot of money to avoid, obviously, hair loss. And there's nothing that sort of brings it back short of a hair transplantation, which can cost, many thousands, if not like $10,000. That's the only solution that I know of that has dramatic effects, I would say, and long-lasting effects. And even then, my understanding is oftentimes they do recommend that you go on finasteride even after a hair transplant in order to maintain the hair that you gain. The approach that we're taking is kind of interesting. I'll talk at a high level about it. The ideal, in my opinion, is to not inhibit DHT systemically. We talked about this previously, that DHT is a hormone that is a byproduct of testosterone, but it's important for your health, your kind of male drive, and so you don't want to block it altogether, in my opinion. But the goal is to block DHT at this level of the scalp, and there is some research about some over-the-counter and prescription supplements and drugs that can block it a little bit more at the scalp level without being a 5-alpha reductase inhibitor. So that's kind of one angle. The other angle is there are some interesting compounds that promote hair growth through a different mechanism than blocking DHT, and it seems to work in other areas. And so that's something that we're working on right now that I'm super excited to share at a future date. But just like the testosterone protocol, we're probably going to we'll probably do some sort of alpha pilot. It won't be as extensive because that one doesn't require lab testing. With our testosterone pilot, we're actually testing your hormone levels before and after to obviously prove that it's working. With hair loss, it's different. There's no blood marker for hair loss like there is testosterone. The obvious thing is you just have to take it for at least 6 to 12 months. Any hair loss product takes months because your hair just takes months to grow in general. And so you just have to take it and sort of see if it either slows or stops growth, or ideally in a perfect world actually promotes regrowth. That's the holy grail in my opinion. Most of the products that you see really don't promote growth. Like your best bet, I would say, for most people, if you're talking about realistic goals, is to just stop or slow the hair loss that you're having. And you as best as you can, you just want to keep what you have. Quite honestly, it's very rare that I see like true regrowth that's happening. So I think the best thing is just intervene early as much as you can. So if there's guys listening to this in their 20s and you still have your hair, but you know you're probably genetically predisposed to hair loss given your family history, or you're starting to see signs, probably better to do something now, because if you wait 10 years and you're like half your hair is falling out, it's much harder to get it back. So that's one thing I would say. And then the other part of it is, I actually think it's I'm not against vanity, but if vanity is a good motivation to get your lifestyle together, it is very helpful to address the lifestyle things. Chronic stress, sleep deprivation, and other things, and like diet are pro-inflammatory, and we do know that inflammation is a key causative factor in not only depression, chronic disease, but including hair loss. And so obviously we want to lose, do those things in order to lose weight and look good in general, but it does benefit hair loss as well. So the more that you can kind of reduce inflammation through all of those lifestyle means, then it's going to help subtly. It's not going to make a huge difference. In the end, if you're genetically predisposed to baldness, you're probably going to go bald. The difference, though, is you may be able to put it off by a decade through good lifestyle. And we know this because there are identical twins who have very different lifestyles, right? So they have the same genetic predisposition, but you see one twin who takes care of themselves, eats right, is fit, manages their stress, sleeps well, and the other person who doesn't, and you'll see one of them prematurely bald 5-10 years in advance. So it does suggest that lifestyle does make a difference, and everyone knows they should do that in general, but it's also even more cosmetic motivation to sort of get on that train.
So DHT has one, sub-product or related product to testosterone. I understand the mechanism, but how about testosterone itself? Because if you think about the goal of becoming more masculine or have to increase testosterone, doesn't that mean that we will lose hair as a result of that? Because if you're more feminine, or if you have feminine hormones, then you'll have hair, right? Isn't that, in addition to DHT, isn't testosterone itself a cause for hair loss?
Not directly, but indirectly. So testosterone itself doesn't necessarily promote hair loss, but the more testosterone you have, the more DHT you have through the conversion of the 5-alpha reductase inhibitor. So it can be correlated, but it doesn't in real life. It's not a direct correlation. There are people who clearly increase their testosterone quite dramatically through things like testosterone replacement therapy and maintain their hair just fine. There's obviously anabolic steroids users who stimulate their androgen receptors tremendously, and they maintain their hair just fine. And then there's other people who they use the same drugs, and it does accelerate their balding. So it suggests that it's not as simple as testosterone converts to DHT, which makes your hair fall out. There are some individual differences. In some people, it doesn't seem to budge their hairline, and some people it does. So as with anything in biology, it's probably multifactorial, and it's probably unclear why some people are more responsive to androgenic compounds in terms of their hair loss, and for other people, they're not. So, it's something that I think people just have to be aware of. You can just monitor and see how it goes. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of individual variability.
Yeah, exactly. Something that always amazes me is that, being Persian, we have a lot of body hair. So funny thing is, if you think about it, you just want to get rid of hair almost on every part of your body except for your head, and then that's the only part that you lose hair. So, which is, again, as you suggested, there must be a more complicated mechanism, because if it's just the hormones, it should affect other areas, or again, maybe there's something unique to the scalp, or I don't know exactly what is working, but that's a funny sort of, it's like God is messing with you. So
yeah, exactly. It gives you the hair that you don't want. Ironically, DHT does promote body hair growth, and so that is something that guys particularly notice. Like, you may not have actually have a lot of shoulder, chest, or back hair maybe in your 20s, but when you kind of age into your 30s, they start to literally grow out of nowhere. And part of that may be, sort of an increasing amount of DHT or shifting in your hormonal profile as you sort of get older. So it is unfortunate, but it's also why, like, interestingly, even the hair that's not on the top of your head, but in the sides and the back, seems to be less sensitive to DHT. And that's why when they do hair transplants, they literally either manually or now with robots pluck those hairs out and replant it on the top of your head, because they're just less sensitive chemically, which is kind of an interesting, like, miracle of nature. It's unclear why the body is like that, but it is what it is. So the other thing, lastly, I would say is on social media, I have a lot of friends who have lost their hair. And I think, like, obviously do your best to maintain your hair, because, we're guys and we do care about how you look. But a clean shaven look, if you've kind of, like, lost your hair, it can actually be very masculine. If you look at, like, Jason Statham, a lot of these sort of masculine icons and role models. Bruce Willis. Yeah, great example. I think the thing is, it's like you gotta kind of get rid of all your hair. The comb over Donald Trump thing does not work. Get rid of your hair. Make sure you have a well-built muscular physique if you look sort of jacked, and then you have the sort of the persona and the personality that goes along with it. Those guys are obviously very, like, masculine in their the way that they walk, talk, and act. They have amazing, beautiful wives, and they're very well respected by their peers, and I don't think it hurts their dating ability to get Hollywood jobs in the least. The Rock is also a great example of somebody who's sort of bald icon. So yeah, don't take it as a huge negative as well. Like, the reality is, like, I don't know, half of guys are probably going to lose their hair at some point. But if you own it and you rock it, there's good. Yeah, it's not the end of the world.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'm 35, and I think I've been lucky. I still have probably like 85-90% of all the hair that I ever had, but I definitely have the genetic factor, and I can feel I'm losing some hair. As you said, 2/3 of men eventually lose hair. But again, I mean, if there's something that could be done to prevent it, obviously, I think if the risk factors are not significant, we should do that. So talking about some of the products that you mentioned, so there are, say for example, pumpkin seed oil, things like that. Are they actually effective in blocking DHT, or are they just not?
I don't think so. I think it's just like the we talked about over-the-counter testosterone supplements. Quite frankly, do not work. There's a million products on the market. Quite frankly, if they work, they'd run research studies and publish them to show that they do work. They don't. And that tells you everything that you need to know. Is if it does work, A, they would be like, selling a lot better than they actually do, and B, there would be validated research. There are some supplements. We've talked, for instance, about ashwagandha. There's one published research study that shows a 14.7% increase, which is basically not very clinically meaningful. So I think it's the same thing with DHT. There are some things like, the pumpkin seed extract, saw palmetto is a common one. They may have mild effects on DHT, but they're nowhere near as powerful as the prescription DHT blockers, like the finasteride or the duasteride, I believe it's called. So yeah, it might shift it slightly, but they also can sometimes cause side effects. So that, like I said, inhibiting DHT can sometimes be problematic as well. So I mean, you can experiment with it in consultation with your doctor, but it's probably not going to shift the needle very much either way.
Right. I've also made a non-formal or non-scientific observation. I don't know if there's any research on this. It seems like just being athletic and active, like athletes, I think they have, they're less prone to hair loss. I don't know if there's any research on that. So maybe as you mentioned, there are two mechanisms. One is just blood circulation in your body. So maybe that's one thing. But say, for example, soccer players or just football players, seems like they have less hair loss. Is that a thing, or is it just
I have never heard of that. Maybe it's just because European soccer players like to have their hair down and then grow it out. So I have no idea. But it's a plausible theory. Maybe because they do keep really healthy, obviously, to compete at a very high level. It could stave off hair loss more. I mean, they're probably higher testosterone at the same time in order to be a professional athlete. So it may counteract some of that, but who knows? I mean, I think, but the general takeaway is working out is good for you in multiple domains. Who knows if it's specifically helpful for hair loss, but given all the other benefits, it doesn't hurt to obviously do it.
All right, we have a question on YouTube from, I'm gonna call him JB. Any advice for how to go from a first date to progressing to more? Realized I fall for girls really quick and trying to not come across too needy.
Yeah, that is a great question, and a classic mistake that guys make is guys tend to project into the future, right? When you find a girl that you like, guys will sit there and they'll fantasize about them being their girlfriend or their wife, and you're one date in, you don't know this person, right? And the problem with that, though, is that it comes off as too strong too soon and needy. And if you think about it, what a woman is attracted to, we talked in a previous episode about confidence. But in addition to that is something really important, which is non-neediness. The needier that you sort of come off, it signals sort of unconsciously the wrong things, which is if you're a high status, high value man, quite frankly, you have options. You should have options. And so your job is to select between the best of these options and optimize for a mate that's going to be best for your long-term compatibility. But if you don't have options, it's very likely that you're going to cling on to the next best girl that you find. You're going to have one good date, and then you're going to be like, oh my God, I want to wife her up. And that just overwhelms her, because what she's sort of unconsciously or maybe consciously interpreting is this guy is acting like he doesn't have options. If he doesn't have options, he must not be a high status, high value man. And so why am I going to reciprocate in this case, right? So you're sending literally the wrong sort of signals. And that's not to say that you should obviously be disingenuous or playing games, but you need to slow yourself down and say you cannot fall in love with someone on a first date. All you can do is decide, is this person worthy of a second date and continuing to get to know this person? Now, the reality is, and there's research on this, the amount of time it takes to really get to know someone and make a decision about if they are wife material or long-term partner material is somewhere in the order of 170-ish days, or just about 6 months. So you should just kind of get it into your own head that you need 6 months of regular dating to really understand someone and decide, is this person a viable long-term partner? And so if you can do that, you can just kind of chill, put on the brakes a little bit, and not get too far ahead of yourself and say, I can't even possibly know if this person is worthwhile or long-term material until I give it 6 months of time. So what I'm just evaluating on date number 1 is, do I feel a physical connection, a spark, some sort of chemistry? And that comes a little bit more intuitively, right? You should quite frankly probably know that within the first 5 minutes. I've actually surveyed a ton of women about this, and I asked them, how long does it take you on a first date to decide whether to go on a second date? And I will tell you, the modal answer by far of all the women I've asked is 5 minutes. Less than 5 minutes. Women are much more intuitive than men. And you ask guys this question, they might say, oh, I need 15, 30, 60 minutes, a couple hours to really decide. Because they're sort of caught up in their head. Women do not think in the same exact way. So I would actually encourage guys to be a little bit more intuitive. Take the first 5 minutes and be like, okay, is there a chemistry and spark? Now, the rest of the date is important in the sense that what you're doing is you're sussing out her personality, right? Does she have the personality traits that are beneficial in a long-term partner? Which is, you want someone who's conscientious, you want someone who's agreeable, you're going to get along well with. And then there's some matching components as well. If you're an extreme introvert, you should be with an introvert. If you're an extreme extrovert, you should be with an extreme extrovert. And if you're somewhere in the middle, obviously try to find someone who's on the same page. You don't need to find someone who's a clone of you or exactly the same, but you cannot be too far apart. The other traits like openness to experience may influence on a more of a macro level your hobbies and interests. If someone is very high in openness to experience, they're very adventurous, they like to go out, try new things, have new experiences, you're probably going to be more compatible with someone who has a similar tendency, even if you don't like the same things. Versus someone who's very low in openness to experience, they like their routine, they like to stay at home, they don't like trying new things. You should probably be with someone who's a little bit closer to that. So these are the things you should be sussing out on the first date: is, are we compatible on a personality level? And then the third and very important thing is, are you compatible on a values level, right? Do you have the same sort of on the same page about religion, about politics, about family and children? These are fundamental sort of deal breakers. And I know people say don't talk about religion or politics on a first date. I have a contrarian view. You don't want to lead with it, like maybe not the first 5 minutes, but if you don't know, maybe from an online dating profile and you haven't had that context, it may be useful to casually bring it up, because if it is important to you and you are looking for a long-term partner, it's a different thing. Obviously, if you're looking for just short-term fun, you have to make sure you're not wasting your time, or quite frankly, wasting their time. And if someone's an ardently religious person who wants to raise their children in that way, and you're an avid atheist and you're completely against that, make sure you're those aren't deal breakers. So that's what you should really be doing. Those three things on a first date is there physical chemistry and spark? Are you sexually attracted to this person? You want to continue to get to know them. Are you compatible on a personality level? And are you compatible on a values level? And those three things you should, put together and decide, do I want to go out on date number 2? Especially because you're not going to even necessarily be able to fully answer those questions on date number 1, unless it's maybe a very long date and you're a very good interviewer. But yeah, it takes time. It usually takes time also for people to open up. It may take, I would say, even 3 to 5 dates to really get a good sense of someone's personality and values, depending on how open they are. If you're kind of a skilled conversationalist and they're an open book, yeah, maybe in 1 to 2 dates, you've got a pretty good sense of that. Other people, they kind of wear a little bit more of a mask on a date. They're presenting their best self, right? Their aspirational self. And so they're not kind of bringing up all their kind of quirks and personality stuff, or maybe they're not talking about the things that are really important to them. So it may take a little bit more time. So with that in mind, you should take the opportunity to use the first couple dates to really get to know them and decide, is this person have long-term potential? Are they worthy of me? So you need to, I would suggest, reverse your thinking a little bit. Is even though you may like this person, that's fine. You don't need to change that, but you need to be scrutinizing them in terms of, are they the right person for me, right? If you're a high value man, you have options, right? You should have the mentality in mind that you are the catch, right? And is this person qualified or competent, or is she going to be able to add value to your life that is worthy of your time and your energy of all the options that are out there in the sea? And when you have that kind of abundance mentality and that you're the catch, it's going to come across as confident, it's going to come across as non-needy, and you're not going to scare them away. So you need to kind of change your internal mindset and frame of being the chooser, which will reflect in a way that she's ironically more likely to be able to choose you back. So that's kind of the advice that I would give about sort of first dates. By the way, I love another commenter just commented and said, I think you need to focus on building a life you're proud of, get hobbies, work out, and get skills. That's a great point too, right? In order to have sort of inner confidence, it can't just be totally sort of made up in your head. Confidence comes from a genuine reflection of competence and skills. And so when you have a life that you're proud of. You're busy, you have hobbies, you are fit, you're feeling good, you have skills, you're gonna be able to be more confident. So the caller said, this girl is 2 months out from graduating with a CS degree too. She's also in fitness, reading, dancing, and really kind, just getting way too ahead of myself. Just really excited a bit. She is way out of my league. Most dangerous words of the English language. Never believe that someone is out of your league. Now, maybe there is some objective reality in terms of like physical attractiveness. Like, yes, if you're like below a 5 and she's a 9, she could be out of your league. But I don't think she'd be out on a date with you if that was the case. So you should basically assume that you're within a couple points of each other, at least on the physical attractiveness scale, and she's willing to entertain you. So by definition of her going out with you, you are in her league. And the other thing to remember too is women are unfortunately judged much more for their physical looks. Men are much less judged. It does matter, but quite frankly, we can make it up a lot more with personality, status, money, other things. It's the reality of how the world works. And so, and this is why I think that actually that other commenter's advice was good, right? And if you are a high status male, or you're moving towards it, if you're young and in your 20s, maybe you haven't attained those things yet, but if you're on a positive trajectory and you have that youthful optimism that I am somebody and I'm going somewhere, that confidence is going to radiate, right? And then you're going to think, again, I'm the catch. She's not out of my league. Maybe she's slightly more physically attractive to me, which, by the way, the research shows that those relationships actually do a little bit better when the woman is slightly more attractive than the man. So you should actually just like assume that that's a good thing if that's the case, but that you're adding value in other ways. Your personality or what you bring to the table is valuable to her. And so you really have to change that mentality of thinking that she's way out of your league, right? You have to have the opposite frame where, again, you're the catch. And what is she bringing to the table? And yeah, she, as you said, seemed really easygoing and fun on the first date, but you're kind of putting her on a pedestal, is what I would say. You don't really know this person. And so, she may have some qualities that you're initially attracted to, but until you sort of know the good and the bad, I think you're idealizing her. And this is why I actually say men are the true romantics. It's kind of a contrarian opinion. Women love the idea of sort of a Disney romance, but I think men are the true romantics in the sense that we idealize women, where women are much more realistic about guys. They want to be wooed, they want to be courted, and that can be romantic. But men are the true romantics in the sense that we literally create a fantasy out of our heads, and that you've been on this one date with this woman, and you think you want to wife her up. So I would say you got to calm that down. The anxiety that you're feeling in terms of this anxious attached feeling that you're describing is coming from your own sort of psychology, right? In that you're over idealizing her. So you got to calm down and just say, look, I don't know this person, right? You're creating a projection of who she is rather than the reality of who she is. And so just slow down a little bit and be like, so far so good, but I don't know this person. I'm going to find out who she really is, and I need a couple dates to figure that out. In the meantime, she is not out of my league. I think about all the things that you're bringing to the table that she can bear, and why should she be qualified to go out with you? So you need to have that sort of inner frame in order to be, more effective. So Ben asked a question about how do you build male friendships? What are the difference between men and women when it comes to relationship building? Great question. It's just as important for men. I would actually argue maybe even slightly more important for men to build strong, solid friendships. And the reason for that is I think women are just, quite frankly, naturally good at and better at men in terms of building and maintaining relationships. This is an interesting thing that I observed. I spent years, actually, I worked in 3 different VA hospitals. So if you're familiar with the VA, the Veterans Administration hospitals are for military veterans. And so the majority of the patient population is obviously male because they served in the military. And a lot of these guys were retired over the age of 65. They'd come in, and sometimes we'd ask about their social support. And besides their wives, they would literally have no social support or friends that were left in their lives, which is a very precarious and dangerous, in my opinion, place to be in, because we know that loneliness is in fact a bigger predictor of physical health and mortality, literally dying, than a lot of other factors, including your diet, exercise, all these other things. Loneliness, social support should be considered one of the foundational health behaviors. That's why I consider relationships or intimacy the fifth foundational health behavior. So it is absolutely critical for your health. And men just don't do a good job of investing in it. And I think the reason for that is because the way that we form relationships is more activity driven than with women. Women can totally get together on a Sunday and just have brunch and just talk with a lot of women. Men can obviously do that too. You can obviously grab some beers and just chat with your guy friends. But how a lot of men tend to bond is more around activities, right? So you meet your guy friends through school when you're doing a class or coursework together. So you're working on assignments. Maybe you're filming a video or you're doing a problem set. When you're at work, you form friendships because you're obviously working on whatever projects that you're working on. You build relationships as you work on difficult challenges together, or you do it through sports. Men bond obviously through working out together, through doing sports and physical activity. And so I think that is sort of the natural thing that men like to do. They like to do stuff together, not just sit and chat. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't do that, but I think about it as like a compliment, right? You may get to know someone in a sports league. You're bonding over the shared experience of being on a team, and then you get to know them on a deeper level by sitting down, having a tea or a beer with them, and getting to know them better. And then you go back and you do the physical activity. So I think men almost benefit from sort of the back and forth of like the deeper, richer conversation, but also the doing a sort of shared activities. I think bonds them. And you know what, the quintessential example of that, going back to the VA, by the way, is the guys who do maintain their long-term relationships that last over the course of decades. One of the interesting observations was it's guys who went to war together, right? When you go through a particularly difficult experience, like literally serving together, going through a like life-threatening situation, maybe even saving each other's lives, that could have been back in your 20s, now you're in your 60s, but you feel a debt of bondedness and kinship and gratitude towards that individual. And I think it comes from doing difficult things. So, I learned that very early on in my life. And so one of the things I would do is almost, not go to war if you can help it, but create difficult challenges to do together. So I'll give you a concrete example. The summer after I graduated from college, when I was 22, I got together with some of my high school buddies, and because I wanted to maintain those relationships or long-standing friendships. And I said, literally, let's go climb the tallest mountain in the continental US together. It's called Mount Whitney. It's 14,500 something feet. And it's a beast of a mountain to climb. You have to go get a permit and apply for it and train for it because it's so high in altitude, you actually get altitude sickness if you're not physically prepared to summit the peak. And so we applied together. We made a whole trip plan and then spent months literally training for this. And it was a tough experience. It's like a 15-mile hike. You go up like 3 miles almost in terms of from sea level, and it bonds you together because there were some dangerous parts of it, there were some difficult parts of it, there were some fun parts of it, and those shared experiences, even if it's over the course of a weekend, there was a 3-day trip that we did, I think bonded us closer together than even 30 days of like, I don't know, or 3 months of sort of casual hanging out every once in a while or talking to each other in passing. So I think you can actually accelerate the depth of relationships. Obviously, nothing replaces time. I think I might have mentioned in a previous podcast that the amount of time to go from a casual acquaintance to a friend to a close friend is like, on aggregate, it takes a couple 100 hours to move through all the stages and become a best friend. So you can't skip it, but I do think you can accelerate it by taking trips together and doing difficult things together because it does sort of bond you in a different way.
So just to give some context, this is kind of a two-part question around life advice. I'm 25 and I'm in the process of exiting the company I've built over the past 7 years, basically since I left high school. The advice I've gotten from people so far is to take some time off to think about what to do next. Like I want to build another business, but I want to use that time to think productively and not kind of fall into this complacent / anxious state of analysis paralysis, if you will.
Sure.
So do you have any advice or like systems or models for how to, I guess, make that transition? and start thinking about what to do next, and also do it in a way where I minimize the potential regret from selling, because I know a lot of people up in that place where they have a sense of regret, or maybe I shouldn't have done that. I'd love to just, put it aside, move on with intensity and urgency.
Yeah, great question. So first of all, congratulations for being where you're at in life. There's not a lot of 25-year-olds who've spent 7 years building a business to the point of being able to sell it. So you're way ahead of the curve. So I think, first of all, pat yourself a little bit on the back for that. I think when I was 25, I was slumming it in school and not making any money. So, I mean, I think it's useful to have a sense of perspective there. The second question I had, and I was almost anticipating your second question, is why are you interested in selling at this point? Like, is the business going well? Did you just get a great opportunity or offer? Where's your head at in regards to making that decision?
Sure. So, yeah, that's something I've been thinking about over the past 4 months, ever since the first offer came in. And for me, I built this business as a lifestyle business. It's basically a online course, digital goods business. Great cash flow, quite passive, but just in an industry that at this point I have no desire working in. I don't really care about the customer that much anymore. And, these type of businesses don't always sell. Right. So the fact that I offer to me is quite, it's not like I can just spend another year working on the business and expect another one to come in. But the biggest motivation to sell is really just to move on to something else and have that clean break. Like the past 2 to 3 years, there's kind of been this inertia of like, yeah, the business is growing, but I'm doing the same stuff, product launch, email marketing. Like, I haven't grown that much, I guess, as an entrepreneur. Yeah. So keeping the business, I guess from an outside perspective, an investor might look at my decision and think, you're an idiot. Like, why are you selling? It's a good cash flowing business. For me, it's more of an not emotional, but like personal growth decision of, let me sell this. There's no earnout or situation where I stay on for another year or two.
Sure.
We a clean break, and it basically creates like a blank slate to go and build something else. So that would be my answer to that.
Well, it sounds like you're making a very rational and reasonable decision. I mean, look, there's no perfect or right decision, but you're talking about, you sort of have lost your love for it, which makes sense. It sounds like you're in a business where it's not an easy thing to exit, and you've got a good offer on the table to be able to do that, and you want to learn and grow more. You're only 25. There's plenty of things that can continue to challenge you, and I absolutely do think you should work on something that is challenging. There's nothing wrong with having a set it and forget it cash flow positive business, but I think if that's the goal, what I would do is hire someone else to go run it if you want to continue to do it, and then go on to do your other challenge, or do what you're doing and sell it, right? But if you're just gonna mentally check out in your company at 25, I don't think you're striving as hard as you could. So, on the basis of all three of those factors, I think it's actually a pretty reasonable choice. What it sounds like to me, though, is you have a little bit of this concern about other people would think this is a stupid idea, or investors would think this is a stupid idea, or other entrepreneurs feel a sense of regret when they sell their businesses. But I'm curious, why do you think that actually applies to your case, given the reasonable and articulate reasons that you just gave me?
That's a very good point. I don't think those things do apply to me. So, to be honest, I think I just read books and read it, and so I've kind of internalized them.
Exactly. That's the sense that I kind of get is look, it's useful to understand that you're 25, you've never been in this situation before. It is useful to read books and hear from other people who are older and wiser about the things that they experience. I think that's exactly why we're doing this at Maximus, is to pass along wisdom, whether it's from me or other members of the community. So it's a useful thing, but this is where individualization or personalization matters. That's a generic piece of advice, and quite frankly, generic advice is not very good. That's why I love doing these dialogues, because if you just ask me this question over chat, I would give you a generic answer, and who knows, maybe it'd be 50% useful. But now that I hear it and your reasons, I'm like, all of those things are generally true. And by the way, not everyone obviously regrets it for selling their business. And I can tell you just as many entrepreneurs who regretted not selling their business when things were going really well, and they lost out on a huge opportunity because, markets go up and down. Right now, by the way, it's a bull market, right? Everything is going at ridiculous prices. Real estate's crazy, crypto's crazy, businesses are crazy. It's a good time to sell. It's a seller's market. So I think it's actually, even just taking into account the macro, a reasonable position to be in. That being said, all the reasons that you articulate, I don't think it applies to you. I think you're making a relatively reasoned sort of decision. So really, I think it's really about kind of addressing your internal psychology and saying, you know what, it's okay to sell a business at 25. And if this is the right thing for you, both financially and sort of in terms of, your opportunity to learn and grow in other ways, don't worry about what other people say. I think, you're not flying in the face of convention, in my opinion. Honestly, it's a coin toss in terms of which way that you take it, and you're making, I think, a reasonable decision for you. So that's the first part I would say is don't sort of engage in the social comparison game and make yourself feel bad, because I almost feel like you're creating preemptive regret where it doesn't even need to be there yet, right?
Yeah, that's a good point.
I have a great article, by the way, on this. It's called an executive psychologist tips for making like better decisions, and I have a whole framework about 6 things that you should do. And one of the tips is, once you make a decision, don't sit there, go back and regret it and sort of punish yourself. Now, there may be things along the way where, let's say you're running a business and you make a decision about like, do I want to keep doing this given how difficult it is, or maybe it's not going as well. There's scheduled times that you want to check in. Maybe it's every quarter you're going to have either a board meeting with your board or a board meeting with yourself if it's a cash flow positive business that you run by yourself. And then you're going to ask yourself that question every 3 months. But it's better to do that than every single night when you're laying in bed and you're like, should I keep doing this? That's just going to drive you crazy. You're not going to sleep at night. Now, with a decision like yours, once you make the decision, then you sell it. There's no going back. So at that point, it's completely pointless. You should just accept the decision. And if you do have a pang of regret because maybe you could have sold it for a little bit more a little bit later, you just say, look, I did the best I could with the limited knowledge and wisdom that I had at the time. And you just forgive yourself, quite frankly. And that was the last part of that article, by the way, is the key to taking risk, in my opinion, nobody talks about this, is being able to forgive yourself. If you can forgive yourself for making mistakes, you can do anything. You can take any risk in the world, because you're not going to sit there and punish yourself for fucking up or failing. And I think the best entrepreneurs that I know are great at forgiving themselves instead of beating themselves up. So take that to heart. And then let's talk about the second part of your question, which is, okay, let's say you decide to sell this business. How do you avoid sort of becoming too complacent, resting, investing on a beach, and not sort of using your time properly? I guess my question to you is, why do you think that's even a possibility? Is that your personality? Like, when you've had periods of unscheduled time, do you kind of waste it away? Or why do you think that's going to happen?
No, I actually think, to rephrase that part of the question, I think the bigger concern I have is I don't want to sell and then get into this, how do I articulate it? I want to take some time off to kind of have some mental rest and think about what's next. Mm-hmm. But I don't do that in kind of an anxious, urgent state of, I need to build another business because I don't have an income.
Right.
And make like a suboptimal decision as a result.
Right.
So I guess my question is, how do you, during a season of transition, think in a way that's, calm, structured, and rational about what to do next?
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, the scenario that you're positing, you're saying that, if I'm stressing out about starting a business as quickly as possible because I'm not bringing in income, the correct answer to that is you don't put yourself in that position. I'm actually not a fan of coming up with a business idea on a timeline. In fact, I had a conversation with a very prominent CEO who I won't name when I was doing an EIR-ship, or what's called an entrepreneurship in residence at Trinity Ventures. He had been a very successful serial entrepreneur, was thinking about doing an EIR as well. And so I was getting advice from him in terms of, doing this. Now, I wasn't doing an EIR to start another company, although I ironically did, and here we are today. But he was, and his advice to me was, when you do an EIR ship, you have 3 months, maybe up to 12 months to come up with the next great idea for a company. And he said something really interesting. He said, name a great company that has come out of being an EIR. And they're very hard to name, right? EIRs are usually successful serial entrepreneurs. They do start successful businesses, but do they create unicorns, the big, iconic, once in a generational companies? Often not. And I think the reason for that, now it's a small data set and maybe it's a limited sample, is because the pressure to come up with an idea within that time frame makes you just pick a good idea, but not a great idea. And so I'm not a fan actually of that model. And that was literally true for my experience too. I did not come up with the idea for Maximus during the 12 months I was at Trinity Ventures, partly because I wasn't even trying to come up with a business. I was focusing on doing investing. But after I left and I was like, well, what do I want to do next? Do I want to continue to invest and practice? It organically kind of came to me. And then I was like, yes, this is really what I'm drawn to do. But if I hadn't given myself that time, and then by the way, I spent another year validating the idea, right? Even before I raised money for this. So it really was like a 2-year process. But I think I ended up focusing on a business that is not only, I think, has the opportunity to be a generational company, but it's something that I really care about and I want to work on for the next 10, 20 years of my life, right? So that's my personal experience. And that's why I think you should be exiting with enough financial savings that you're not going to feel pressured. If that's not the case, then don't sell your company. But if you should be making enough that you're going to be comfortable for at least, I would say, a year or two.
Absolutely.
Yes,
5 to 10 years.
Excellent. So then if that's the case, you have 5 to 10 years of cash reserves. Then you're not. See, you're worrying about something that's not actually reality, right? So you're saying, oh, I'm going to feel pressure to do so. Well, you may feel a pressure to do so because, I don't know, there's a social pressure that you should be making money like as a paycheck. But look, you've made your money, right? Like your money is going to work for you.
I think it's more like eating into the principle.
Yeah.
Like I've got those cash.
Which is fine though, but you should worry about eating into the principle if you have 1 to 2 years of reserve. If it's 5 to 10, you should have enough that maybe it's not going to be equivalent to like a full-time salary, but you should be making enough off of the investment that you're making on that. You should obviously go invest some of that money, and you should have some annualized return. It should be enough to keep things floating by, and obviously be reasonable with how you spend your money. But you should have enough runway that you have psychological runway to say, hey, I don't need to start something under pressure, and then, like I said, start a good but not great business. So it doesn't sound like you're in that position financially, so don't put yourself in that position psychologically as well. You're almost more scared in your head than you need to be. So that's the second thing that I would say. Third thing I would say is I think the thing that entrepreneurs struggle with the most when they go from working full-time on a company to being on the beach, so to speak, literally and metaphorically, is you go from an incredibly intense schedule that's very structured to you have all this free time. And I do think that concern of yours, out of the 3 things that we talked about, is actually legitimate. And the way that you avert that, though, is you create a schedule for yourself. Do not have a completely unstructured day where you don't know what to do. You need to have a routine and almost treat your quote unquote beach time or your time at growing and exploring like a full-time job, right? So you get up in the morning at 8 in the morning and you're like, all right, what am I doing? I'm going to learn, right, about this new sector that I'm curious in. So from 8 to 12, I'm going to make some calls, interview some experts, read some books, read some websites. I'm going to take an online course, whatever it is. Okay, and then in the afternoon, what am I going to do? Well, maybe I want to do some consulting to try out this new sector, and just like shadow a CEO or do something where I can learn about that. And then maybe in the evening, I'm doing some investing work with the principal that I gained from it. And so it is like a full-time job, but you're not working on one thing. You may be working on 2, 3, 4 different things, but you structure it, you schedule it, it's calendared out. And as artificial as it may seem, you block out the time and you're like, all right, reading from 8 to 9, call from 10 to 11, etc. And by doing it that way, it ensures that you're not going to waste your time. You're not going to squander it away. Now, it doesn't mean that you need to be like OCPD perfectionistic about blocking every hour of the day. I don't want to give off that impression, but you need some structure. The answer is probably not scheduling every hour of the day, but I guarantee you it's not having a completely blank calendar in front of you either. You got to find the right in between for you, and do that. And what I would also say is I highly recommend a system that I've obviously developed called the Keystone Habit. If you haven't already read it, we'll post in the Discord link after. Part of the Keystone Habit is it's a system for productivity, right? To make sure that you're using your time effectively. You take 4 minutes at the beginning of the day to plan the next 4 hours, and then you check in to see whether you did it or not, and you iterate. But part of that is lengthier and lengthier keystones. So not only is there 3 that you do during the day, there's a summary keystone that you do at the end of every day, the end of every week, end of every month, quarter, year, and 4 years. And so by doing that, you can think about the long term, right? So even though your head's down in your 8 to 5, like I said, learning, experimenting, talking to people, you should be taking this scheduled time to reflect and say, oh, okay, I spent the week doing this. Am I heading in the right direction? Did I like doing this? Did I not like doing this? What am I going to do differently next week, next month, next quarter? So you have to schedule those times, those keystones, those reflection periods to almost like step away, take a couple steps back, and see the macro point of view, which is now that I'm in this exploration phase, how do I want to take the next steps? So highly recommend that as a complement to obviously structuring your day. So great question, and I wish you the very best on both the sale and your next steps, and feel free to follow up in a future call-in radio show and let us know how it goes.
Awesome. Thank you for the advice.
Absolutely. My pleasure. And like I said, congratulations again. You're a great role model to, a lot of the guys, both in their 20s and beyond for the success that you've had, and glad to have you as part of the community. So thank you very much, everyone. You can always continue the conversation on the Discord channel. I'll actually paste in some of the references to some of the things that I talked about, including the Keystone Habit and the article on decision making, which will be 2 very useful resources for everyone who listened in today. So thanks again, and have an amazing rest of your week.